guess when I go, I just go like, hello there, James Addison here. So my paper topic was the dialectical differences between Southern United States English versus New York City English. So I try to summarize my paper as much as possible, as quickly as possible, so we can get the gist of it. So in the United States, a person's dialect can say a lot about the person's upbringing, about the location and the type of environment, the type of the sorts of people they were raised around. One of the biggest things about paper during the 1980s, dude named Dennis Preston conducted several dialect mapping projects. That's not the whole point of the project, but that's the thing that I focused on, where they had people from Hawaii and other places that weren't in the main country of the U.S. map out the dialect locations in the United States. And you'd come across some interesting, again, through two other linguists named Alvarez and Mason. And they focused on Latino and Latina people versus the perceptions of those from Europe. Just that whole section. And there were some consistencies across both maps. And they go over, of course we know, what is dialect. A dialect is defined by linguists as a variety of language that is distinguished from other varieties of the same language by its pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, discourse conventions, and other linguistic features. And considering how people migrate throughout the U.S., this makes sense. Especially when travel was difficult enough so that separate colonies developed cultural differences early on. And these were all variations of the language based on their environment. So in these maps, you'll see that these areas of the north and south are divided into like Texan accent, country accent, bayou accent, old southern accent, in a blog from Do You Tweet With an Accent. And then in the north, we have the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, and Staten Island. Either way, so from one of the maps, you'll see that for the south, you'll see like River Talk, Creole, Southern Y'all, Twilight Zone, Good Old Boys. And then the first map, we have Southern Hillbilly. And then these same maps have New York broken into Brooklyn and Jersey accent. We have New Yorker accent, like the movies, which was actually drawn close to Delaware. And then we have Boston Yakuk and fast speaking. I don't know what Yakuk means, but it sounds more like something from Minnesota. Just like that. Lines first, and then discussed earlier, is the use of the word twang from multiple people. The most accurate and detailed description comes from the Complete Vocal Institute, CVI. And this article discusses how to verbalize Southern twang. You're going to see a little video here, it's gross. So the writer states that when twanging, the opening of the epiglottic funnel is made smaller by bringing the arytenoid cartilages closer to the lower parts of the epiglottis, the petiole. However, this is a little different from a Southern twang. So the description goes even further, stating that when the opening of the funnel is made even smaller by bringing the epiglottis closer to the arytenoid cartilages, the sound assumes a much sharper and more penetrating, snarling character like a cackle. This reveals that this twang is not produced through nasalization, as often referred to, but around the larynx or the voice box. This is in contrast to members of New York City, as there is an increased amount of nasalization in the dialect and surrounding accents. The two languages share that both Southern English and New York English are heavily mocked, though, or poorly attempted, and are the two strongest dialects in the United States. So, in most other dialects and subsequent accents, the tongue is kept more in a neutral position for the vowels. So it just typically says right here. In this case, words like mate or meat become mate or might. However, when combined with distinct twang in some areas, this meat is more actually like might. Additionally, in the Southern dialect, there's a strong F sound, and the sound is made a different way between the two regions. In New York City English and other forms, the F sound is made by placing the top row of teeth gently on the tongue and vibrating the larynx while pushing air through. In Southern English, the F sound is made by slightly curling the tip of the tongue back and creating a dental stop with the tip touching the top of the mouth where the gums meet the two front teeth. Th. Even the face changes during these movements. Th. This particular F sound in the dialect is typically accompanied by so words like thing become fine, instead of thing. There is an emphasis on splitting vowels and morphing the surrounding sounds, which both dialects do, albeit differently. The spelling of Boston by one of the participants in Alfred's Mason study, spelled as Boston, is an excellent example of how New York City is different from the surrounding area. The typical pronunciation of Boston is Boston, whereas those from the area would say Boston, which is close to a New York City accent, but this does refer to the fact that these types of dialects typically use an sound in place of when speaking, so it would be laid out as Boston. There's a more formal analysis of this subject, which I will just lay out for you, because there's no way I'm going to pronounce each one of those syllables correctly, because I am just terrible with it. This also goes with the southern pronunciations. There's also a list here that has some of the variations and differences. So then we come to word distinctions. So with the South, you hear a lot of y'all. You see that a lot with these responses. In areas like New York City, you'll see like you guys, which is oddly the gender neutral term for a group of people. Although interestingly enough, y'all does have a bit of a history stemming from as early as 1702 in British literature in a poetry anthology titled The Prologue to the Fate of Capua. So the line of the poem reads, "To write well's hard, but I appeal to y'all." And aside from sounding terrible, the word was used in a few other works from various British authors until it just kind of puttered out. But in another history blog, David Barker comes across a difficult to find article. I couldn't see it. From linguist Michael Montgomery titled The Etymology of the Word Y'all. And yeah, I've talked about the word y'all for like a full page in this paper. But Montgomery claims that y'all goes back to the Scots-Irish phrase ye-aw, and he offers as evidence a letter written in 1737 by an Irish immigrant in New York to a friend back home. Now I beg of ye-aw to come over here. As he understands the hypothesis in the paper, ye-aw was Americanized into y'all, which is the proper contraction of you all, but would not have come into being without the influence of the Scots-Irish phrase. This means that the word took an interesting route of arriving in New York City before moving along with settlers and their presumably indentured servants to the south. From this point, the word and many others would become ingrained in certain dialects and then even travel back up to New York City. And then other such southern terms, or ones I find interesting, like muddin' or frogging. And you'll see a lot with this that there's a tendency to drop the G from the ending of some words, especially if they end at N. But then there were some food variations like biscuits and gravy, along with livers and gizzards, which are all related to the environment. It is also typical to use is in place of are, like you was gonna, instead of you are going to. And this would be said by a southerner, it'd actually come out like, you's a gonna listen to me. And then with New York City English, this is actually where hot dog originated on Coney Island in Brooklyn, where the meat became a popular treat to replace fried clams because they were going out of season. And then newspapers also gained popularity, but mostly hot dogs. Also, some words have a more Jewish origin, like the Yiddish word schmuck. Some words have a Scottish origin, like galoot, like a big galoot, and others even have an Italian influence, like gabagool. Some of these words can still be found in everyday usage, and some exist only through television, but with like Southern dialect, the televised or broadcasted language of a location will then become a representation of that region, whether or not the word usage and accent differentiation were correct. So the development of Southern English and New York City English and the considerable differences between the two dialects are filled with many strange and unexpected origins and usages. As languages are always in flux with what is spoken introduced to the majority, whether it be slang or neologisms or new abbreviations and initialisms that affect the way new conversations happen, with lol being an example of how this can happen on a countrywide scale. Both languages developed relevant wordings and descriptions based on what was available or popular in the residing areas. The one obvious thing from this research is that if two people got together and tried to speak to each other in the extreme form of either dialect, they probably wouldn't be able to understand one another. And yeah,